All right, so I'm going to do a quick walkthrough on how to set up some GINA triggers. So let's get started here. So just an example of what you can do with GINA triggers. So to get started, so I'm going to hit my J boots here, put them on my bar, click them. Spell did not take hold. Oh, I have Sal. Duh. Boom, J boots. So now I got a buff up there. I have a timer, not tracking how long I have on J boots. And every time I click this, it's going to refresh. I can do the same thing if I put Levy on myself. Boom, I gotta go Levy timer as well, right? J boots and Levy. And if I feign death cooldown. Now if I were to fall to the ground, there you go. I get a big, if I was, that's just an example. I get that alert to know to, oh shit, I fell to the ground kind of thing. And I have a little timer up here. It says feign death failed before I can hit feign death again. So I got a bunch of different things going on. I have different colors, different timers in different locations. Bunch of stuff you can do. I have a timer button. I can start a timer here to put a timer up here. I got a kill timer button to end the timer. If I start it, wait a few seconds, I hit it again, it restarts it instead of just ends it. There's a bunch of stuff you can do. I've also got a bunch of stuff that I can't really trigger, like I have an enraged and an FTE and so on and so on and so on. But anyways, so those are some things you can do. Now let's show, if you've never set this up before, if you have and want to know a little bit more on what you can do, this is how you do it. So let's go over to my other monitor over here. Oh, not that. Here we go. So this is what GINA looks like. So if you're brand spanking new to GINA, one of the first things you're going to want to do once you get it installed is you're going to hit the add button up here. So add a new profile, and so character profile. So for every tune that you play, you need to have one of these set up, because basically each one of these is a different log file that you're directing to. So for instance, if I didn't have one for Colm, my monk, then I only have one for up here, then if I was playing, I wouldn't get all the GINA triggers that I might have built, but nothing would pop up because it's not, I have to direct it to the log file to read. So again, if you're brand new, you're gonna hit add. It's gonna give a bunch of blank information here. You're gonna hit that button right there. Here's your log file. You would select the person that you wanna make it for, like my monk or my shaman, whatever, right? Enter a profile name, character name. You don't have to, whatever. All this kind of crap really doesn't matter. Just make sure you got the log directory in there, right? And the profile name so you know which character you're on. So once you have it in here, if it's not green with the little red thing right there, click on that, because what you're basically doing is you're telling it to stop reading that log or start reading that log. So I hit that button to make sure that it's starting to read the log, and I hit the red to stop it. So just make sure it's lit up green. Now, once you've got this, GINA is now reading your logs. So now that GINA is reading your logs, if you want it to do special things like monitor GA boots, monitor, buffs like haste or whatever that you're getting, or, alert you when feign death fails, or whatever you're trying to do with it, right? However you're trying to set it up, what you really need to do is you need to make triggers now to cause GINA to do something special, to basically input these things in your screen when it reads it from a text file. So I've got my character made. I've got my character linked to my log file. So GINA is reading the log file. Now I'm going to make some triggers for GINA to be able to read, to do things with what it's reading from the log file. So I got a bunch of categories here. You might not have those to start. What you would do is, these are groups, these folders. These hold a bunch of other subgroups and triggers inside, yada, yada, yada. So if you want to make a group, like let's say class, then I've got a bunch of classes I play. So then I would make one for my monk. So what I would do is go to class, add group, and I'll call this one, I'll call this one Necro, because I don't have a Necro. So now I've got Necro in there. See, it doesn't have a little drop down like my monk does because it doesn't have any subs. So what I do is go to add trigger. I'm going to call this test, or we'll call this DMF. How about that? Search text. We don't know yet, so I'm just going to put that right there. Hit save, whatever. But this is just an example. So now I've got Necro. I've got the trigger for DMF. So if I was a necromancer and I wanted to track my personal timer or another person's timer for DMF, I could make a timer here to, well, you'd have to make one for each, but whatever. So I'll call this one edit DMF me, because this would be tracking DMF on me. You'd have to do a separate one to track DMF on another person, regardless. So now I've got this in here. So the trigger name is just the name of the trigger. It's going to basically be what appears in that list. Really not that important. search text is very important because that is what you're telling the trigger to look for in your logs. So for instance, I'm going to go back over to my game real quick. So when I click my J boots, it must be standing. How am I not standing? There we go. So you notice every time I click this, you see your feet feel quick. Now that text is written in the game, and therefore is written to a log. So for instance, if I click this item or I were to cast a spell, and in response to me doing that, the game puts your feet feel quick, then I can use the words your feet feel quick as a trigger for it to start the J boots timer, because that's what happens when I click the J boots. So you basically are just looking for strings that are occurring in any of the text box as trigger words to set off an alert, a timer, display text, whatever it is from GINA. So let's go back over to the monitor. So I come over here. So in search text here, I would have to put whatever DMF says when I cast DMF on myself or another person. Well, how do you find that out? Real easy, actually. So, oh, that's not that one, sorry. We go over to the P99 wiki and I search for dead man floating. I scroll down here. So every spell and a lot of other things as well will have this little details box. It's really important. So cast on you, cast on other, wears off. So if you're going to cast, if you want to track only when something is cast on you, you would use the cast on you text. If you want to do someone else, then you would have to use this text, but you can't use the word someone. You'd have to use the person's name, and I'll get into that in a minute. But for now, we're going to do this. So you become like dead. That's the trigger. So every time you, just like with the J boots, every time I clicked it and it would say your feet feel quick, every time you cast DMF on yourself or someone casts it on you, so this works like if you're a melee and you want to track when an enchanter casts Vogue on you, you could look up Vogue in here, find the text, you, whatever. That's the trigger for Vogue. So that's, if you were to cast it on yourself or someone was to cast it on you, this could track your buffs. So you become like death is the word. So in search text, you become like death. You can leave off the period. Shouldn't really matter. But anyways, so you become like death. Now, the question is what I want. So I've got the trigger set up. It knows the game is GINA is reading the log. It's going to see you become like death, and then you have to tell it what to do. Okay, what do you want me to do next? Well, I would want to start a timer to track how long I have left on the buff. So I would go to timer, go down here to countdown timer. We need to know how long the buff lasts. Let's go back to this. So 1 hour and 12 minutes duration. So 1 hour, 12 minutes. Okay, I've got that filled in. Now, this other one is pretty important too. If the timer is already running when triggered again. So what that means is, for instance, if I were to cast DMF on myself twice, since I'm already tracked it, started tracking it once, now I've got another instance, GINA seeing the text again. What does it do? Does it start another timer? Or does it just reset the current timer for that same buff? Well, I want it to restart this current timer. Reset on timer name match. That's basically to set that up. So the only reason you wouldn't do this, start a new timer, would be like, I actually can't think of an instance, but it would be if like you wanted to see like multiple layers of the same buff casting. Like maybe if you were spamming Torp, right? Well, I guess not really even because they overwrite. I can't think of a reason why you'd ever want to start a new timer instead of restart current. But I would mostly go restart current. That should say 12 minutes. And we're pretty much good. So we got a timer, it's a countdown timer, and then timer name. So this is what's going to be on the timer label. So I'm going to write DMF. That's all I care about. So now every time I cast DMF on myself or someone casts DMF on me, I'm going to have a timer that's counting down 1 hour and 20 minutes or 1 hour and 12 minutes. It's going to show the time because I put the time in there. It's going to say DMF so I know which buff the timer is. And if someone casts it on me again, like with the last minute left on it, instead of keeping the minute-long timer left and then starting a new one underneath it, it's just going to reset the one that's got 1 minute back to that 1 hour and 12 minutes. So that's all you got to do. It's pretty simple. Now, if I were to save this and run this as is, it would not work. And the reason for that is the category up here. So category, I have a bunch of stuff in here. Now, if you're brand new install, you're not going to have anything in here. You might have 1 or 2 default ones. You're going to have default for sure, and then something else maybe. But category is kind of how you are able to split and get different parts of your screen with different GINA things all separated in different formats, yada, yada, yada. So basically, let me hit save here. So there's basically 3 things you need to get a GINA timer running. You need to have your logs running, you need to have a trigger set up, and then to link the logs, the trigger together, you need a category. So I'm gonna go over here to category. Oh, you need an overlay as well. Actually, so overlay category and a trigger, whatever, we'll go with that. But let's do a category quickly. So I'm gonna make one for DMF, right? So where is it glitched out? Why can't I see? There we go. So every time I add a new type of like tracking thing, like I have for instance, just an example here. I have one in here called buffs. So all my buff tracking, whether it's DMF, SOW, haste, clarity, whatever, my buffs category is for all of those. I have another one in here for chain heal, avatar, attack on off. So I have all the different dots I've cast, a bunch of different stuff in here. Some of these only have like one trigger that they really work with. Other ones like buffs have, a very huge amount of them. But the whole point is this category groups them all together. So everything that I put assigned to the buff category, so all the triggers that I make and then assign to the buff category are all going to go in the same part of the screen with the same format. And so like if you want the top right corner of your screen for buffs, then you can set up a buff. If you want to put like tracking dots on the other side of the screen with a different color, and maybe it's a different text, you can set that up as well. And you'd make another category called dot, and you could put all your dots. You could assign all your dot triggers to this category, and they'll be on another part of your screen. So that way you don't have timers. You don't have like a DMF timer right under a root timer, right under a dot timer, right under a an FOS timer, under a SOW timer. Like have them all stacked like that, it can be hard to read. So you want to split them up by categories. So for instance, I've made a buff category here. So okay, well let me just do this the right way. So if you don't have a buff category, or you don't have a category to put whatever you're trying to put together in, you hit add. It's going to make a new one. New category. I have a few extras here, but the new category number 1 will pop up, right? You just rename it to like buffs. I'm going to put a underscore test in there just so I don't get it mixed up. So now I've got buff test category. Perfect. So you have to assign an overlay. So I'll get back to that in a second. But so once you've got this made, you go into timers, you go into text, you tell it, okay, this is the overlay used for that. This is the overlay used for that. I'll come back to this, but make the important thing here is make the category for your buffs or your dots or whatever, or both, whatever. Now you've got your category made, you've got your trigger made. Now we need to make an overlay. So the important part, okay, so you've got 2 types of overlays. You've got a text overlay, which are the left-hand side, and the ones with the timers on them, those are timer overlays. 2 separate ones. So the ones on the left here, the text overlays, are used for specifically putting text on your screen. The timer ones are specifically for putting a timer that counts down or up or whatever somewhere on your screen. So if you want to make timers, you have to make a timer overlay for that group of timers. So just as an example, I have a buffs timer. Now I'm going to click it. And when I click it, let me go over to my other screen real quick. Hopefully you can see this. Actually, let me see if you can see this. You totally can. Great. Okay, so up here, this is what happens when I click on that timer. Or I'm sorry, on that overlay. You're going to get this box. It's movable. You can resize it to refit how you want the timer bars, how long, whatever, yada, yada, yada. You can change the font size, the font background, a bunch of other shit, whatever. But the important thing is when you first make an overlay, whether it's a text or a timer, this in here, this text in here is going to read default or default 1 or 2 or whatever. Double click, type in whatever you want. I'm going to type back to buffs, right? And then hit save. But the other thing is where you see how you can see the JBoots bar. This is basically where it's going to be on the screen. So I'm going to put it right over here by my actual buffs. I've got them up there. So I'm going to hit save now. So now I've got an overlay. So if I go back to overlays, I've got a buff overlay here, right? And if you want to add a new one, you just hit add. And then I'll just go back over to my other screen. Actually, am I even on the right screen? I'm not. Whatever. Okay, well, hold on. Let me do this again. I'm going to go to overlays. So you go to overlays. If you want to make a new one, go to overlays, go to add here or here, whichever one you're trying to make. I'm going to hit here. And as soon as I do that, on my other screen, you're going to have this pop up, overlay number, right? So I would call this buff underscore test. And I want it to be down here. And I want it to be, the timers to be, this long, and I want it, actually I want it to be half that size, maybe not half that size. And I want all the timers to fit into this box so that I don't run into, my stuff down here, and I'm gonna hit save. So now if I go back over to my other side, up here I've now got buff test. So now you've got an overlay made, you've got a category made, and you've got a trigger made, all for DMF, right? Now the good thing is that seems like a lot of work for one trigger. Luckily, the buff overlay and the buff category can be reused multiple times, right? Every single buff you want to track is going to go to those two categories, so you don't really need to worry about it too much. But just as an example, so let's go over here. So now I've got this overlay made. I'm going to go back to my categories. Now in here, buff test, right? I've got it selected. I'm going to go over here into the timer section, and it says overlay. I want to change it from my normal overlay, which might be default if you don't have anything set up, to buff test. So now what I'm basically saying is every time you trigger a trigger, or every time a trigger sends data to my category of buff test, it's then going to take that and send it to my buff test overlay. So I'm just linking them all together. Now, once I've done that, I can go in here to DMF, category. I'm going to drop down and I'm going to go to buff test. I now have buff test. Yeah, all right. I'm going to hit save. So now I've got everything I need. I got my overlay made. I got my category created and linked to my overlay. And I now have my DMF trigger with my timer all set up all nice and pretty, and it's sent to the right category. Okay, now you're good to go. And I'm going to go over to my game. And I can't cast DMF, but it doesn't really matter because it's reading a log file. So if I were to just say you become like death down here in if I just type that out, that's the exact same as if the game was saying it to me because it got cast. So if I click this, it didn't work because I'm not in a group, so I have to do say, or you can do whatever. So, there we go, perfect. So I said it out loud, and you see the DMF bar pop up right there. Now, the coloring, the text type, how big or how long it is, how thick it is, all that's adjustable through your, your overlay. So if I click this and I bring that back up, I can resize it, here, and I can jack the text size up, and I can change the check size and yada, yada. I could have moved it as well. That probably would have been smart a little bit. There we go. So yada, 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 right? And so the other thing to check is every time I say this, boom, I set it again. Instead of making another one underneath it, it just reset it. So perfect. Now, if I was doing this myself and I wanted to add that buff to the list, instead of creating this whole new thing just for DMF, I would have just made DMF and then checked those same boxes so that it would have appeared up here. But you can see I already have it up here because I already have a DMF timer. So anyways, that's how you make a GINA trigger. Now there's some other fancy stuff you can do. So again, like the way I triggered that DMF to go off was why I set it. There's some tricks you can do. So for instance, I have a timer set up. And the way I trigger the timer to start, because how do you get a timer to start? I just do a /tel to start timer 101 and then the word A. Now, there's no person with that actual name. So when I hit that button, you're going to see down here, start timer 101 is not online. So if you ever try to send a tell to someone who's not online, it's going to say their name is not online. So you can actually use a bunch of crazy names like start timer 101 as trigger text written to a log. You're basically injecting that phrase into your log file, and then you can get GINA to then read that specific phrase to start a timer. You can do that for all kinds of shit. So for instance, if I feign death, FD timer 101 is not online. I use the phrase FD timer 101 in my search text. I inject it by making a macro that's, attack off, do ability, and then tell FD timer 101 nothing or anything or whatever. They're not online. It doesn't matter what you say. And by doing that, I'm injecting the text in there. GINA's reading it, and GINA is starting a timer based on reading that. And you can do that with Sneak. You can do that with, kind of with Sneak. You can do that with a bunch of different things, like sense heading. You don't really need to with sense heading. That's another one I did with sense heading. Instead of having to always look down here, I just made it so every time I sense heading, and it reads, you think you are heading, and then a direction. I just have it put in the middle of the screen so I don't have to look down there. But you can do a bunch of stuff like that, right? So yeah, my kill timer is the same thing. Like kill GINA timer is the text I inject. So there's a bunch of good things you can do with GINA. just kind of work through it. And again, same thing with text. Whenever you're doing a text one, like, south or whatever, do I actually have since heading? If I click down here, you can see. So this is my since heading one. You think you are heading, so bracket S. So there's also special characters you can use. So bracket S is essentially a string. And so what this line right here is doing is it's searching my log file for the phrase you think you are heading, and then any text at all. And then it's grouping any text. So when I hit since heading, it says it thinks you are heading south, north, northeast, whatever direction, right? So it's going to read the log. It's going to see that, oh, this matches. And then what it's going to do is it's going to take everything after that match, so south, north, east, northeast, whatever, and it's going to assign it to the value S. And then what you can do is you can then go in here under the text and say display that value. And since you know that everything, all the text that's going to occur after that phrase is always going to be a cardinal direction that you're facing, then you can just tell it to output bracket S. And bracket S is going to be whatever direction you're facing. You can do the exact same thing for people's names as well. Like just as an example, if you go back here, see how it says someone looks dead when you cast DMF on another person? You can literally, if you want to track DMF or any spells on another person, what you can do is, instead of using the word someone, just imagine replacing that with bracket S. So now when you cast DMF on just as an example, on my monk, it would say Colm looks dead. But because you don't want to have to make one of these for every single person you could ever possibly cast on, all you have to do is make a timer that would read, just as an example, something like, instead of someone looks dead, you would literally just put bracket S, capital S. There you go. And that way, what it does is it's going to say any name, take whatever name the log has in there, make that value S, and then looks dead. Oh, I know you're casting DMF. The name is going to be the S, and then you could just tell it to, timer would be like DMF bracket S, and then it'll track DMF for another person, right? Really, really easy. Yeah, but that's basically it. And you can get way more complicated by adding sounds and everything else, but that's a basic way to get it started. That should cover almost all your buffs, all your debuffs, everything you would possibly need. And the other thing to note here is every time, so I'm just going to go back on my computer real quick. Nope. So see how I've got one color and format buff here and then another one up here, and when I feign death, I've got another one down here. Each one of these little sections is a different overlay. So I'm just going to click on some of these. So if I got buffs up there, right? I've got buff watch down here. I've got avatar timers there. I've got group and raid buffs over here. I've got dots over there, tracking over here in the middle, timers up top, monk discs in the middle, overlay one was a random one I made, and then I've got the buff one down here. So each one of these that you see here are different groups, and each one of these overlays has its own category associated with it, and then all I have to do is tell the trigger to say, hey, this is a dot. I'm going to make a trigger for a dot, so send that to the dot category, which is going to be tied up to my dot. So all my dot timers are going to go up here. All my timers are going to go here. All my buffs are going to go here. Every time I cast Avatar, it's going to go over there. My buff watch, like, FD and Torpor or short time buffs that I need to pay attention to the timer on very closely, those are going to go here. And so that's all you got to do. You just make a new category and a new overlay. Every time you want to make a different, section of your screen have different, things in it. That's all you got to do. And I hope that was very helpful. Yeah. Y'all have a lovely evening.